Hey guys, how are you? Hang on a sec. Just checking to make sure we are in good shape. Awesome. Looks like we are live. Everybody let me know if you can hear me and see me okay. Looks like we're in pretty good shape. So welcome everybody to this last of our year-round gardening workshops. I'm glad to have you guys here, and it has been a fun couple of weeks. Also a little bit tiring. So these are a lot of work and they take a lot out of me. I don't know why it is, but something about the lives are just takes a lot of energy, I guess. So glad to have everybody here. This will be our last of the three that we're doing this week. And this is probably one of my favorite ones because this is kind of the key. This video is the one that really kind of takes us to the next step where we can actually get things planted. All right, so welcome everybody. While we're kind of waiting for people to collect here, I usually like to wait a minute or two. So we're up to 56 people already. We had about 190 registered. So while we're here, tell us where you're from, what your garden zone is. I'd love to know what your winters are like. And that's going to be important for what we're talking about today. Glad everybody can see and hear me good. We've got Northern California. We've got New Jersey. Detroit, Michigan. I was actually in Detroit not very long ago, and not by choice either. We were on a flight and got waylaid there because of a medical problem, and had to stop and wait in Detroit for 4 hours while that got dealt with. So Columbus, Virginia Beach, Illinois, Tennessee, Maryland, Richmond, Virginia. All right, welcome everybody. Middle of Tennessee here. Okay. Great. I think we'll go ahead and get started so that we can honor everybody's time. We're up to 66 viewers now. So let's just go ahead and get things moving. So before we get started, make sure you hang around. I do have an opportunity for you guys to sign up. If you sign up for the Master Gardening course, or I've been messing that up all week, the Year-Round Gardening Master Course. If you sign up for that, then you can also be eligible to receive our succession planting course as well, which that's what's showing up here on the screen. So make sure you hang around. I'll tell you a little bit more about how to do that towards the end. Today we are going to be talking about protecting our crops in the wintertime. So we're going to cover a couple of different things. I am going to do just a brief review of the timing that we talked about yesterday, just because it's kind of important as we're talking about what we're going to use to protect our crops. Then we're going to talk about fabric row covers. We're going to talk about mini hoop houses, and we're going to talk about cold frames and go through all of those. Today's class is for those of you that garden either in raised beds or in the ground. Most of what I'm going to be talking about today is not for container gardeners, unless you live in like zone 8 or above. The stuff that I talk about today will help if you live in zone 8 and you're growing in containers. But those of you that live in the colder areas where it gets really cold are going to have a hard time growing in containers because those containers freeze so quickly and so hard during the wintertime that it's a little bit tougher. We need to have a little bit more volume and bulk to our planting. Okay, you do need some space, so you need to make sure that you're dedicating some space to your fall garden. And we're going to talk about hoop houses and cold frames and the values from those. So we'll talk about why they're so important and how they can really help us a ton. And then just so that everybody's aware up front, I am going to talk about the Year-Round Gardening Master Course. And I do have an offer for you at the end. And so if that offends you at all, then you're not in the right place, okay? All right, so again, most of you have probably been here already, but just for those of you that haven't been here, my name is Rick Stone. I'm the founder of the Gardening Academy and the principal author of the website, Our Stony Acres. And also most of you know me from our YouTube channel, which is where you're watching this right now, and that is Stony Acres Gardening. I'm a master gardener, and my wife and I have been gardening together for a long time, 23 plus years. This year this garden that we're doing right now is our 26th garden together. And our fall garden this year, when we plant our fall and winter garden, that will be our 14th fall and winter garden. Okay, so we've been doing this year-round gardening stuff for quite a while as well. Just a really quick kind of helpful hint to you guys as we're going through. So the plan is today I actually have quite a bit of information to cover. We're going to be probably 25 minutes or so. And so if you have questions as we're going through, I'm not going to be able to watch the feed like I can here at the beginning because I'm kind of focusing on teaching and staying on track. So if you have a question, start with some question marks. That will help AJ, my wife, who is upstairs right now. She will collect all of those questions and put them in a little sheet here so that I can make sure that we get those answered towards the end. And then the other thing is, please limit your questions to today's topic. So we're talking about year-round gardening. We're talking about growing in the fall and in the winter, and that's why people are here today. So we want to limit our questions to that. I'm not gonna do pest control and soil things and stuff in this lesson. We're here to talk today about year-round gardening. So just so you know, when we get to the question section, those are the types of questions that we're going to be fielding today. Okay. All right. So again, we're going to talk about the 3 affordable methods of how you can protect your crops in the winter. And let me turn myself off here. This is a couple of our cold frames. They kind of sit side by side that you can see them in the picture. And we also use hoop houses and fabric row covers as well. I'm all about inexpensive. So you'll never hear me recommend that you should go build a greenhouse or that you should build a high hoop, okay? Because those are expensive. Now, if you already have a greenhouse or you already have a high hoop, that's amazing, okay? That's really cool. And everything that we're going to talk about can happen in a greenhouse or in a high hoop as well. I just don't promote that because I'm all about keeping expenses down in a garden. So we're going to talk about the least expensive options that will still allow us to extend our garden. And everything that we're going to do with row covers, mini hoop houses, and cold frames, you would also be able to do in a greenhouse or a high hoop. And there's no disadvantage to not having those more expensive options, which again is part of the reason why I don't really teach them. Really quick, I just wanted to do a bit of a review of what we talked about yesterday for those of you that weren't here. Yesterday's workshop, which is available, you can watch the replay if you want. We talked about when to plant. And just a kind of a really quick review, if you're putting transplants out, so things like broccoli, cabbage, cauliflower, those type of transplants, we want to start thinking about putting those in about 6 weeks before our first frost date, okay? 4 to 6 weeks before. If we are planting by seeds, so here I'm talking about lettuce and spinach and carrots and all of the leafy greens and the other root crops that we can be planting in the fall, then we want to start targeting planting about 8 weeks before our first frost date. And we've got a little bit of wiggle room there. 6 to 8 weeks is kind of what we target. And then remember that we want to choose shorter maturing varieties. So if you've got 2 varieties of broccoli, one that matures in 110 days and one that matures in 75 days, for fall, you want to choose the 75-day option because all of those maturity dates are set based on spring planting times. So 110-day broccoli will actually take about 125 days to mature in the fall, whereas a 75-day broccoli will only take about 80 days or 90 days to mature in the fall. And so that month difference can make a huge difference because the declining sunlight in the fall adds about 15 days to the maturity of all of our plants. And so you need to make sure that you watch out for that. Here's a few ideas of plants that you guys can be putting in and that we're going to be using the cold frames and the hoop houses for. You've got broccoli. So these would specifically be planted for fall. Broccoli, cabbage, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, kohlrabi, beets, turnips, lettuce. Okay, those are fall planted. We plant those and we'll be harvesting those during the fall. If you're interested in doing some winter gardening, then we're going to be looking at a little bit more of the hardier plants, things like kale, spinach, mosh, arugula, carrots, parsnips, Swiss chard. The list is pretty long. There's actually about 30, 35 different plants that we can grow either in the fall or winter months total. But that kind of gives you some examples of some of the things that we're going to be growing here. But remember that the entire idea of this fall and winter planting is we want to bring those crops to maturity before the 10-hour days arrive. So sometime in November, depending on where you live, your day length is going to drop below 10 hours. And at that point, everything kind of stops growing. There's a few exceptions to that, but almost everything stops growing at that point. And so we want to make sure that our crops have reached maturity by the time we hit that early November timeframe, which is why we plant so early in the fall. And then basically winter gardening is just keeping those crops in cold storage for 2 or 3 months so that we're able to harvest them fresh from our cold frames and our hoop houses. Okay, so that's the concept and the idea that we're going for here. Okay, all right, so there are 3 relatively inexpensive ways for us to protect our crops during the winter and fall. And the first of those is heavy fabric row covers. So this is some of our heavy fabric row covers. And believe it or not, this picture was taken at least 12 years ago. And I still have those row covers, okay, that we're looking at in that picture. Heavy fabric row covers last a long time. And so they're a really good investment for your garden. When I first started doing this, which is 14 years ago, right about now is when we started learning, I bought heavy fabric row covers, and I still have those row covers. Now they are starting to show their age. They've got a few holes in them and are stained and looking pretty rough, but they still work and they're still doing their job. So when you buy heavy fabric row covers, they will last a long, long time, as opposed to the lighter fabric row covers. Those are the kinds that we use for pest protection or, starting some early spring crops or something like that. Those are light fabric row covers and they let more sun in and they're not as durable. They just don't last as long. So how do we know that we're choosing a heavy fabric row cover? First off, you're probably going to see them say that they'll protect somewhere down to 24 to 26 degrees Fahrenheit. They may say 6 to 8 degrees of frost protection, something like that. But the thing that you really want to look for is the ounces per square yard. So if they don't list this, if you're shopping on Amazon or something and the manufacturer doesn't list this, stay away from them because they're probably not a good product. Okay, so we want to be looking for row covers that have 1.5 to 2 ounces per square yard. Okay, so that's how they measure the thickness, is ounces per square yard, and we want 1.5 to 2. I've seen a few that are 1.4, and that's fine too. That's close enough. But so anywhere between 1.4 to 2 ounces per square yard is the weight of the fabric that we're looking for. That's a heavy fabric row cover. Okay, light fabric row covers will be like 0.9 or 0.75, or I've even seen them as low as like 0.55 ounces per square yard. Okay, those are great and they have their uses in the garden, but that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about heavy fabric row covers, which are going to give us the most frost protection for our money. Okay, and again, those will last a long, 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 long time, and you are going to use them all over in your garden. I use them in the spring. I use them in the fall. I use them to protect crops from the cold in the winter. I use them to protect in the spring when I have something that is that's a little bit tender and we've got a late frost coming in. I'll throw those heavy fabric row covers over them for the night and protect them. In the wintertime, we're going to be using them all the time, and I'll talk a little bit more about that kind of as we go through. But you can also use these heavy fabric row covers in the fall if you happen to have a freak early frost. So for us, it almost always, like seriously, almost every year it happens this way. We'll have a weather cool down right around the 1st of October, and we'll get frost. Okay, so we'll have frost that would normally kill our peppers and our tomatoes and all of those warm season crops. And then inevitably 2 days later, it warms back up to the mid 70s and stays there for 2 or 3 weeks. So we lose our tomatoes and then have this warm weather when the tomatoes could have still been ripening. That's frustrating. If you have heavy fabric row covers, you can prevent that. So we just throw big heavy fabric row covers over our tomatoes and our peppers on those frosty nights. It protects them, keeps them from freezing, and then we take them off when the weather warms back up and we're able to continue to harvest. And so that is another great use for those heavy fabric row covers. But as year-round gardeners, we are going to be using them to protect our crops. And a lot of the hardier crops, even in some of the warmer zones like zone 8, all you're really going to need if you live in zone 8 is heavy fabric row covers. And you'll just go throw those out on your crops on the evenings when you have frost. You'll just cover them up then, and most of the rest of the winter, for those of you in zone 8, you're probably just going to leave those off and just throw them on when you have those cold spells that come in. For those of us that are zone 7 and below, you're going to be using these in the fall a lot to protect crops and protect plants. In the spring as well to get things started a little bit early. And then all through the winter, we're going to use heavy fabric row covers inside our cold frames and our hoop houses to protect things. And in fact, you can even say for example, kale or mosh, even spinach. You could, if you live in like zone 6 and 7, you could just throw a fabric row cover over them for the winter, and that would protect them. You'd still be able to harvest from them. Especially in zone 7, you should be able to do that with those heavy fabric row covers. So super good investment. They're not outrageously expensive. I mean, you can buy a 8 or 10 foot by 25 foot piece for $20 or less. And you probably will end up cutting that into a couple of pieces and using it in your garden. And like I say, it lasts forever. So it's a super, super good investment for your garden. So people will ask if I have any recommended brands. I don't have a favorite brand. I wish I knew what the brands were of the row covers that I bought 13 years ago, 14 years ago, because they've lasted for so long. But 14 years ago, I didn't know I was going to be teaching people about this. And so I didn't keep track. The newer stuff that I've bought, the 2 brands that I have liked are Agribond, which is a little bit more expensive, and you can get that usually from a lot of the nurseries and places like that. And then the other one that I like is called Ag Fabric, and both of those have been pretty good. There are some bad brands out there, and so just be careful what you do. If you're going to risk buying a less expensive brand, make sure that it's somewhere you can return it. Because I bought some a couple of years ago, and this was a lighter row cover that I bought, and it literally completely disintegrated into dust in less than 30 days. And that was what I got for paying for some cheap stuff. So make sure you spend a little bit of money. And again, Ag Fabric and Agribond are both good brands that I like. Okay. All right. Now let's talk about hoop houses. So this is one of our hoop houses. This actually is at our old place, the house we lived in about 10 years ago. So this was the first hoop house that I ever built. And we ended up, I think we had 2 of them here at this place. And basically a hoop house is kind of a step up from fabric row covers. It's going to offer more protection from the cold and especially from the wind because hoop houses are normally made using some type of plastic. So for us, we just use the inexpensive painter's plastic. You just need it to be about 5 mil or better. And you can use that inexpensive painter's plastic. But that creates a lot more protection from the weather, from the wind especially, which is what is going to be one of our biggest problems in the wintertime is that cold wind is going to damage those plants. And so a hoop house with that plastic is a definite step up from the fabric row covers. Hoop houses are pretty simple to build. They're relatively inexpensive. Let me show you this picture. So this is a picture of that same hoop house with the plastic off, looking at it from the other direction. And so basically is what we do to build a hoop house is we use 1/2 inch PVC pipe. So you're going to take that 1/2 inch PVC pipe and bend it. It works really, really good in raised beds. It's great for raised beds because you can just bend that pipe and stick it in the dirt in the raised beds, and you don't have to do much beyond that with the pipes themselves. But you can also use it if you don't have raised beds and you're working right out in your garden. You can do that as well. Usually it's a good idea to buy a little bit of rebar, maybe some 12-inch pieces of rebar, and you can pound those into the ground, and then you put the hoops over the top. So you just put that pipe over the top of that rebar, and that will hold it in place. Now, one of the things that's really important is to have a ridge pole. So you can see going down the middle of this, these hoops, I've got a ridge pole. So we kind of just over the years have kind of improvised what we use for the ridge poles. Sometimes I'll use wood like you see in this picture. We just had some furring trims that we used and just drilled some holes through. Other times we've actually used another piece of PVC pipe, and that works really well too. You just put it on there, and then I just literally just run a screw through both pipes. And the reason why we need to have that ridge pole is because it adds rigidity to the structure, to the overall structure. So it makes it stronger for the wind. When the wind starts blowing, if we don't have that ridge pole, then those hoops are just going to blow over and everything's going to fall apart on you. So putting a ridge pole on there is super important. It increases the structural stability of that hoop 1,000,000 times for not a lot of money. Okay. Then once you've put that structure together, you're just going to cover it with some simple painter's plastic. If you want to spend the money on a greenhouse plastic, you can, but there's not really a lot of benefit to it in this situation, because it's going to be out in the elements and everything. And I found that if I take the plastic off and put it away for the summer so that it's not out in the summer sun, that plastic is going to last me 3 or 4 years anyways. Greenhouse plastic probably isn't going to go much beyond that. And so I just like to use the inexpensive painter's plastic because it's, you can buy a piece to cover a hoop house for $10 and it works out really good. So overall, a hoop house, let me see if I've got another slide. Yeah, I do. Overall, a hoop house ought to, in today's market, a simple hoop house, you could probably get away with about $25 to $30 probably to build one. So this one, you can see this one's at our current house. In this case, I just threw the plastic over, put a couple of little pieces of lumber that held it down on the sides, and then just clamped the ends together. And so again, very simple, very inexpensive. You're looking, the PVC pipes, they got a little expensive for a while, but the prices have come back down now. So you ought to be able to buy them for $3 to $4 each. So if you bought 5 of them, like in this case, you'd be somewhere between $15 to $20 for those, and then about $10 for the plastic, and you're off and running. Okay. You can get a little fancier if you want. And I actually, the last 2 years, I've built hoop houses they have their own frame. And so the hoop sits in its own frame, and then I put that frame on top of my raised beds, and I actually have attached some hinges so that they actually open up and hinge open. And those are really really super handy. And I teach you guys how to build those in the Year-Round Gardening Master Course. So if you're interested, that's one thing that you'll get from that. So where do hoop houses work the best? If you live in Zone 8, this is all you're going to need. I mean, this will be amazing and will work out really well. In Zone 7, depending on what your Zone 7 is like, this could be all that you need. So if you live somewhere that has relatively mild winters, then a hoop house may be enough for you. Those of us that live in Zones 3 through 6, the hoop houses are only going to be good for our super hardy plants. So things like kale, spinach, mosh, Swiss chard, tatsoi. Those will make it in a hoop house. Carrots probably would as well. Some of the other plants are a little more tender and will want a cold frame for protection when we get into the colder areas, especially those of you that live in zones 3, 4, and 5. A hoop house will extend your fall growing season a lot, but if you really want to get serious about growing in the winter, then you're going to have to move on to our next option, which is cold frames. Okay, so let me show you. This is actually all. I have 3 4x8 foot cold frames. This, I think, is all 3 of them lined up together, so they just end up in our garden in the same bed, and we line them up. So they're just simple boxes with glass lids, and in our case, we just set them on the ground in our garden. So our main garden is where we put our cold frames, and we plant those beds in the late summer, and then when it starts getting cold, we'll actually bring our cold frames out and we just set them on top of the crops, and they just literally just set on the ground. Okay, you can also design cold frames to go on top of raised beds, and that works out really well also. But essentially, a cold frame is a simple box with some type of glass lid. Okay, they're going to be lower profile, which means they're not going to catch as much wind. They're going to offer much more wind protection. Normally, we make them out of wood. You'll see commercially available ones that are made out of that polycarbonate plastic. And I've never used one of those. I kind of sometimes question whether that would offer as much insulation value as the wood sides would or do. So I'm really happy with my wooden ones, and these cold frames offer the highest level of protection. Okay, they're going to offer the highest level of protection for you, and will be really good, especially for those of us that live in the colder areas. I have 3 cold frames. And then we have a couple of hoop houses as well that we use, and we kind of, just choose, the taller, more hardy crops like kale and Swiss chard go in the hoop houses, and the lettuce and the spinach and the carrots and all that kind of stuff go in the cold frames, and they do super, super well. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about how to build them. Again, this is one of mine. I took this picture when we actually built it a long time ago now. But the structure is that the front should be lower than the back. And then we orient it so that the front, the lower side, faces to the south. If we're living in the northern hemisphere, obviously. If you're in the southern hemisphere, you're going to switch that around. And the reason why we do lower front to back, there's a couple of reasons. So ours are 12 inches in the back, and they are 8 inches in the front. So that gives them a little bit of a slope. Okay, and that does a couple of things. Number one, it allows more sunlight to come in, especially towards the front of the cold frame. And then the other thing that it does is it puts a little bit of an angle so that when it snows and when things melt, that will run off instead of freezing on the glass. It will actually run off, and we don't have to worry about getting big frozen chunks of ice and stuff on there. That will run off a lot easier. So having them with an angle is really good. And then you just need so some type of wooden box with some type of glass or plexiglass lid. So you can be as fancy or as simple as you want with these. I chose to build mine using plexiglass lids, but at the time I didn't have anything else available to me, and so we built these with these plexiglass lids. Each box has 4 2x4 foot plexiglass lids that just kind of sit on there, and we've got some little hooks that keep them from blowing off in the wind. So that's what we chose to do. But you could easily choose to just use an old window, an old storm door, something like that would be great to work. The key is to have some glass, and the reason why we want glass is it provides a lot more insulation value than some other. So either glass or plexiglass, either one of those is going to provide good insulation value. And then it allows sun to still get inside to the cold frame, which we need in order for us to be able to harvest, because we need the cold frame to be warmer inside than it is outside so that we can harvest, because you can't harvest things when they're frozen. They need to be thawed. And so we always harvest on sunny days. And so you need to have those clear lids. People have asked me over the years, can I build a cold frame and use plastic for the glass? So just use like your painter's plastic for the glass. The answer to that question is yes, you can, but you're going to get more of the protective value of a hoop house than you would a cold frame, because that glass or plexiglass offers a good insulative value, way better than what the thin painter's plastic does. So yes, you can build them out of that, but don't expect as much protection from them. You'll have the protection from the wooden box, but you won't have the protection from the glass that you would otherwise. But make these as simple or as easy as you want. I've seen people that have actually done, instead of a wooden box, they've used straw bales. So you put 4 straw bales around your bed and then put some type of old window or something on top. Great idea. That would work really well also. Cold frames can be the more expensive option for sure. So my cold frames, I built them all. I built one our first year, and then I built the other 2 the next year. So one of them's 14 years old. The others are 13 years old. And we built them out of pine, and they're now kind of starting to show their age. Within the next year or 2, I'm going to have to replace them finally. But they are more expensive. So when I built mine, they were about $150 is what it cost us to build. Based on what prices are like now, lumber's kind of come down, but I think the plexiglass is still pretty expensive. So you're probably looking at more like $200 to $225 to build one cold frame. So they are more expensive than the hoop houses for sure. But they do offer a lot of protection, and you can do a lot of fun stuff. So where can we use these cold frames? In zones 8 and 9, cold frames for winter gardening are overkill. You don't really need to have a cold frame. Now, if you have a cold frame, that's awesome. You can use it for winter gardening. And there are other uses for cold frames besides winter gardening. You can use it to start seedlings in. You can use it to harden transplants and get things started extra early in the season. So there's plenty of reasons why you might want to have one in zone 8 and 9. But if we're just talking about winter gardening, it's overkill for zones 8 and 9. For zones 6 and 7, they're perfect to have, really, really handy. I love having mine, and they really expand how many crops we can grow and how long they last. And so they're great. If you live in zones 3 and 4, cold frames are a must-have, okay? Because we need that extra protection in those really cold areas. You're going to have to really settle in, and you guys in zones 3 and 4 are the ones that are having the crazy, 2 or 3 weeks at minus 25, and you're going to have to really protect your crops from those. Now, one other thing that I will say here before we kind of finish up is another strategy that you can use is combining either your hoop house or your cold frame with fabric row cover, okay? So I do this when it is the coldest time of the year. So for us, that super cold time usually is January. Sometimes it'll bleed into February, but we're zone 6B, almost zone 7. And so, that's kind of our time frame where we'll have temperatures that drop down into the single digits. It's very, very seldom that we go below 0. And again, these are Fahrenheit for my Canadian friends. But we very seldom go below 0. So, but we do have that time frame in January. And so is what I will do during that 4 to 6 week time frame. I'll open up my cold frames and I put a fabric row cover inside as well. Okay, so that fabric row cover will go on the inside of the cold frame, and then that adds even more protection and really it helps to extend that growing season. So January and February, my cold frame usually has fabric row cover in there as well. And then remember, during those 3 months, December, January, February, whatever it mixes in, those Parsippany months, the plants aren't growing. So it doesn't matter that we have a fabric row cover on top of them, a heavy fabric row cover, because we're just protecting them. during those months. Later, when the sun starts to come back and it starts to warm up, we want to take that fabric grow cover off so that the plants get light and sun. But during those cold months, we just want to settle in and protect them, and then go out on a warmer day and harvest. So there you go. That is how we protect our crops from the winter weather. Okay, so let's talk really quickly about the year-round gardening master course. And then we did do a prize drawing again today, and I've got a couple of winners on the prize drawing. And then it looks like we've got a pretty decent list of questions here. So we'll go through and answer those questions as well. Okay, so what do we do to become better at this whole year-round gardening thing? I want you to come and join me at the year-round gardening master course so that I can teach you how to grow 365 days a year. The year-round gardening master course has been around for 7 years now, and we've had literally thousands of people go through the course now. It's about 5.5 hours worth of pre-recorded video that you guys can watch, so you can watch it anytime. We have what we do for the first 4 weeks of the course. So starting on Monday, the 17th of July, we'll do a weekly study guide, and we go through and break down the different modules in the course, and we study 2 of those each week and go into real depth with those. That way you don't have to feel overwhelmed like you have to watch all 5.5 hours at once, okay? And then for the next 4 weeks, starting on July 20th, I'm going to do a Q&A session for you. So we'll do this on Zoom, not here on YouTube, but instead on Zoom, so that it's a little more private and a little smaller, more intimate group. And you guys can ask questions. We'll get all your questions answered. We have a private Facebook group as well. This year, as an added bonus, we are adding a workbook that goes along with it. AJ is working on that right now. We have the workbook all done for the first 2 weeks of the session, and we'll have the others finished up by the time we get to those. So it'll be a new workbook, and then we're going to be adding some additional content as well that you guys will get as part of the deal this year. Cost for this, for ongoing access, and ongoing access means as long as basically I'm alive, I guess. You'll be able to watch it as many times as you want. Go back and watch that. You'll have access to it so that you can continue to refresh yourself on that. Ongoing access is normally $79, and for you guys that have been here and have been so faithful at coming and watching these workshops, I've got a special deal for you. If you buy it before July 15th, which is Saturday, you'll save $10. So your price is $69. So if you look down in the description of this video, there's a link. It has arrows pointing to it so that you can find it. That's the link that you'll click on. If you click on that, then it will give you that $10 off. And then as a bonus, if you buy before Saturday and you buy using that link down in the description of the video, I'll give you access to this is our succession planting course, how to grow more in smaller spaces. And we talk about succession planting, which is a really good complement to the year-round gardening course. And this is just a mini course. It's about a half an hour long, and but a good little complement to this as well. And you'll get that as a free bonus course if you buy using that link. Okay? All right. Congratulations to our prize winners. Let's do that really quick. So these are the last of the prizes, last of the prize drawing. Thank you for everybody that entered. Smart Pot today, it's a 3-gallon Smart Pot, and Pat L won that. And then the seed collection was won by, and I'm going to apologize, Umaja. Hopefully I didn't totally slaughter that name. I apologize if I did. So both of you, I will send you an email. In fact, I've already scheduled it. It will come out here in just about an hour. You'll get an email directly from me asking for your mailing address, and then we will get those mailed off next week once things have kind of settled down here for us. We'll get those mailed off to you. Just so that you guys know a little bit more about the seed collection. This is our fall and winter seed collection. Sorry, the light's glaring off of it. Our fall and winter seed collection. This is from True Leaf Market, and they had me go through and curate this collection. There's 14 seeds in this package of all crops that we've talked about. These are all seeds that you'll be direct seeding in the garden. So it's leafy greens and root crops. 14 total seeds in this that you can get for only $17. It's like $16.91, I think is what it is. So there's a link in the description down here if you guys would be interested in this as well. It's a good way to get started, and depending on how much you plant, these could last a couple of years, so it's a really good deal. So there you go. All right. Okay, so let's go ahead and we'll move on to our question section. Let me just make sure. Yeah, that's where we're at. So let's move on to our questions. And so here it's kind of the ground rules. It looks like we've already got maybe 8 or 10 questions here. We want to kind of keep this to less than an hour. And I know today's was a little bit longer. We talked a little bit longer. And so I'm going to try and limit it to at the most another 20 minutes. If you have a question that you haven't already asked, would you please put some question marks in front of your question. That'll help AJ to see that, okay? And really quick, Glenna Davis is saying, bummer, you've already bought the course and you didn't get the bonus. Glenna, email me. We'll get you the bonus. I'm happy to give you that bonus course. So Glenna, just shoot me an email and we'll make sure that you get that, okay? All right, so let's go ahead and answer some questions. So Natalia is saying, watering in the fall and winter, how, when to water with a hoop house and a row cover? Thank you. Okay, this is a great question, one that comes up quite often. The nice thing about winter gardening is you don't have to water. So those plants kind of go, as long as you've been taking care of them during the fall and that they're well watered towards, for me, and it's hard because everybody's weather is going to be a little bit different. For me, the breaking point is about mid-November when our temperatures start consistently getting down below 20 degrees Fahrenheit in the evenings, okay? The plants by then have shut down. They're not growing. They don't need a lot, okay? So as long as you well watered your crops during the fall and you give them one good soaking on a nice warm day in November, then you don't have to water for a long time, like until first part of March. So we go from about the middle of November to the first part of March without watering at all. So everything will be fine. They don't need it. They're not really growing. The exception there is mosh and claytonia, that they both continue to grow, but they just don't. There's enough moisture in the air and in the soil that they don't need to be watered, and so you don't really need to fuss with it too much. We always have that kind of awkward stage, like so we have what's called secondary water here in our town, which is it's a canal water source, so it's not using fresh drinking water that we use to water our lawns and our gardens with. That usually gets turned off about October, somewhere between the 1st and the 15th. So I kind of have that awkward month where I'm dragging a hose out and watering by hand in my cold frames and my hoop houses. So you kind of have to deal with it. But again, the weather has cooled off. You're probably only having to water once a week at that stage. And so watering actually is not a big deal with the winter garden, okay? Angie, in Indiana, Zone 5, how do I protect crops in containers? My neighbors and I live in apartments. How do we protect our crops? Will weather be a factor? Okay, so containers are really going to be hard for you, Angie. You could do some experimentation and see. In Zone 5, though, it's going to be really cold, okay? So if you want to do some experiments this fall and winter to see what you could do, first off, I would choose the hardiest plants, okay, for those containers. So kale, carrots, mosh or corn salad, claytonia, tatsoi, what else? What am I missing? Spinach, okay, carrots. Those crops are going to be your hardiest crops, and so you could try planting those in containers, and then you could use some heavy fabric row covers to cover them. If it sounds like if you're living in an apartment that you are, you're probably on a deck or a patio, so it may be a little bit hard to build a hoop house to go over them, but do your best to come up with some structure to protect them. But recognize that especially in Zone 5, in a container, it's going to be hit and miss. I would love to hear what your results are, But the problem with containers is because they're up and exposed to the elements so much more, and there's so little soil volume, they freeze really quickly, and then that is really hard on those plants. Even the hardier plants will struggle with that. So do your best, do some experimenting this year, but keep your expectations relatively low. Okay. All right. Call me an optimist. How do you anchor the material so that the bugs don't crawl under in the summer and so that they're not blown over in the winter? Okay. So the fabric row covers in the summer, I will anchor them down with, there's actually a couple of different options. They actually sell some little staples. They're kind of a staple that you press into the ground. So you press it through the fabric row cover and into the ground, and those staples come with, they have a kind of a plastic washer that will help so that it doesn't tear through the fabric. You can use those. That will tack it down, or you can just be simple. I have, in the wintertime, all my fence posts and everything that I have normally for my tomato trellises and our raspberries and all that kind of stuff. I have all these extra I-beam posts and stuff laying around. And so I just lay those down on the edges. Other people that I know bury the edges of that fabric row cover. The only problem I would have with that is that's going to cause those edges to deteriorate faster. But I know a lot of people that will do that. So they'll put it over the hoop and then they just bury it with dirt to keep it down. So and then same in the in the summertime, you can just hold those edges down, or you can get those clips, kind of a little staple. Just go. I tried to think. It was just a couple of days ago that I looked those up, and I think I was on Gardener Supply is where I saw them. I can't remember if I saw them on Amazon or not, but that's a good option. Okay, what is a good height? So this is Glenna. She says, what is a good height or distance for a hoop house from the soil to the top of the hoop house, and how far away on the sides for the plants? Okay, so I think with a hoop house, you probably about 3 feet side to side is kind of your minimum. So we have some beds that are 3 foot wide, some beds that are 4 foot wide, and both of those work well with the hoops. As you get smaller, it's going to get the problem is you're not going to be able to go as tall maybe as you want. The smaller those hoops get, they're going to have a harder time. It's going to be really awkward if they were really tall. Ideal height for me, height-wise for a hoop house, is going to be tall enough for my tallest plant, which is kale. So kale is usually the plant that is the tallest that I grow in a hoop house. So if you've seen how tall kale plants can get, they can get to be 3 foot tall. Some people that really take care of them can get them like crazy tall, but mine never get that tall. So I would say, from the soil to the top of your hoop, somewhere between 36 to 40 inches should give you plenty of room for those taller plants to grow. And usually I'm growing the taller plants in the hoop house. So things like kale and Swiss chard and collards and things like that will go in those hoop houses. So, 3 feet to 40 inches maybe is plenty. The original ones that I built were a little bit too tall, and they never really needed them as high as they were. So I think 3 feet would be a pretty good height. Is there a minimum size recommended for a cold frame? It's just based on your beds, really. I wouldn't make one any bigger than 4 by 8 foot, just because it will become very hard to handle. So my 4 by 8 foot cold frames are relatively easy to move around and to handle. So I end up putting them together on the lawn, and then I'll move them over and set them down on my beds. And that size is fairly manageable. I think anything bigger than that would be a little bit unwieldy, and you also, your lumber costs are going to get really, those longer lengths, they're not standard 8 foot lengths, are going to be more expensive. So I would say biggest you'd want to go is about 4 by 8 foot. Smallest is whatever fits your beds. You want, you're going to put some money into those, and so you want to make sure that you're covering. I don't know that I would make like a 1 by 1 foot, cold frame, but but whatever your beds, we have beds that are 3 by 8 foot, and I, someday may build some cold frames to go on those. Right now, we just use hoop houses, but just design those based on your needs for your beds. So if you've got raised beds that are 2 foot by 4 foot, then build a cold frame for that, and it will work out just fine. Okay. How do you start parsnips when it's so hot? Do you start them in the house or direct sow them in the garden? And do you cover these hoop houses in the winter? And what months do you harvest them in? Okay, so parsnips are hard to do. I have done them a couple of times because parsnips they have a much longer maturity date than carrots. Okay, so most carrots that we're going to grow in the fall mature in about 65 to 70 days, whereas parsnips are more like 110 days. So you probably need to be thinking about planting your parsnips now, because you're going to need that much time for them to mature before November rolls around. So you have to just baby them. All of the crops, these early plantings of crops, really have to be babied. So you're going to be watering them. I don't use I have a drip irrigation system in my garden, but when I'm trying to germinate these beds in the fall, I actually don't use the drip irrigation system. I'll give them all a good soaking, that bed a good soaking so that it's wet. But then every day I come out with my hose, and I've got a shower mode on my sprayer, and I just shower the top of those beds every day, sometimes twice a day. When we're up in the hundreds, I'll go out and do it twice a day. You want to make sure you keep that top layer of soil moist. Now, not soaking wet, but moist. And so, it could be twice a day that you're doing that. Another thing that you can do, especially with parsnips and carrots, is use burlap. So you can buy some burlap, and you plant your seeds, and then you throw that burlap down over the top, and then you water the burlap. And that keeps the seed bed moist and shaded, keeps it cooler to get those seeds to germinate. It is tough to get parsnips and carrots to germinate. I have fairly decent luck with carrots. Parsnips are a little bit tougher to do. And if you want to get parsnips going for the fall, there's a really good chance that you're needing to do that right away. So if your frost is anywhere close, your first frost is anywhere close to October 1st, so even as far back as like October 15th, now is the time to get parsnips planted, because they need so much longer to mature. You think if they're 110 days, that's 3 months. So July 15th to August 15th, September 15th, October 15th, November, if we add the extra 15 days, if we want them to mature before that 10-hour day comes, now is when we're going to be planting them. Okay, so you definitely need to make sure that you are getting those planted right away. Okay. Kylie is asking, can broccoli be overwintered if my hoop frame is tall enough? It really depends on the year and where you live. So again, in our zone 6B garden, there have been a few years where I was late, like, what was it, 3 years ago, I didn't get around to growing my own seedlings. And so I bought seedlings from a nursery, and they weren't the right variety. They were Watham, which is 110-day maturity. I planted them anyways because I asked the guy to bring them in, and he brought them in, and so I bought them. And I felt bad that I didn't want to not buy them from him after I'd asked to bring them in. So I planted those, and they didn't get done. They didn't, they hadn't even formed heads before it got really cold. So I threw a heavy fabric grow cover over the top of them and went, whatever. Whatever happens, happens. Well, that year we happened to have a really mild winter. We never got down into the single digits at all, which is a little unusual for us. And come March and April, those plants had survived, and they set heads, and they grew side shoots, and we had a great harvest. So last year I did the same thing, planted some late, and covered them up, but we had a very, very hard winter last year. Tons of snow. We had temperatures down as low as 0 degrees, and we lost the broccoli. It just didn't survive. So it really kind of depends. A hoop house is going to be fine for broccoli in like zone 7 or above, but below zone 7, it's a hit and miss proposition. It just depends on what your winter's like. If you have a fairly mild winter, then yeah, it might make it. So for me, I do it almost every year just for the fun of it, and we lose the broccoli, that we're trying to overwinter 2 out of every 3 years, maybe even 3 out of every 4 years. But I'm in it pennies for seeds, so because I start my own seeds. So you can choose that, okay? Angie is saying, in my community garden, we have a black cover over the soil and say it reduces the weeds. What benefit is fabric cover on soil inside a fenced garden? So that fabric, that's different than what we're talking about. That's not the fabric row covers. That's called weed guard. And weed guard can be beneficial. It can keep weeds down. You will pay for it later, though. It's a real pain in the neck when it starts to deteriorate and has to be replaced. It's a real pain to deal with and to get out. So I don't normally recommend using weed fabrics in your garden. There's other options, just mulching and maybe using cardboard or things like that. So I don't really recommend those because they're such a pain to deal with when they do finally deteriorate and you need to pull them out. They're a nightmare to deal with. So yeah. Now you could use them in pathways and stuff like that, but again, if you ever have to pull it out, it's a disaster. Okay, will a cold frame work well on a metal raised bed in zone 5? I don't know. Probably that metal raised bed is going to get colder than a wooden raised bed for sure, because the metal doesn't have the same insulation value. But boy, I don't know. I don't want to tell you, yeah, it'll be fine, and then have you go spend money on a cold frame. I don't have metal beds, and so probably it will be, but I'm not 100% sure about that, because I know that those metal beds do freeze harder and a little bit faster because that metal doesn't insulate as well as wood does. So I might almost, instead of in that bed, I might instead put a hoop house over the top of it and just try and do fall crops and not really plan on winter crops in that bed. I would just do fall crops. So extend your growing season. Even in zone 5, if you plant spinach and kale and those hardier crops, carrots, they'll last well into December. And so I might choose to do that, put a hoop house over it instead, and not spend the extra money on the cold frame, unless you have an inexpensive way to try a cold frame. But I'm assuming you're talking about one of those, the kind of the corrugated, what do they call them, Oli beds, or is that right? So I don't have any experience with that directly under a cold frame. So I would worry that it would freeze harder and faster. So I'm not 100% sure. Okay. Sorry that I can't be more definite on that one. Okay. Michelle is saying, oh, I did. Shoot. I'm sorry. So Michelle's saying on where to use your cold frames. I did not have zone 5 listed. I saw that when I was practicing and meant to go back. Zone 5 cold frames. So I usually group zones 5, 6, and 7 together. So whatever I said about zone 6 and 7, I meant to include in zone 5. I'm sorry. That's embarrassing. I actually even saw that and meant to go back and fix it and didn't. So I apologize. Zone 5, you're going to treat pretty much like zone 6 and 7 because they're relatively similar. Okay. Somebody is asking about termites. I'm assuming you mean with a cold frame. The one nice thing about termites, and I don't have a huge amount of experience with termites, but my understanding is they're pretty well dormant in the wintertime. And so I don't think you need to worry too much about it. One thing that we do with our cold frames is we buy some, they're called furring strips. So they're just about a 1/2 inch thick and the same width as like a 2x4. We actually put those on the bottom of our cold frames so that instead of the wood sitting on the dirt, that furring strip is sitting on the dirt. And then as those deteriorate, you can take those off and put new ones on, and that saves the wood on the side of your cold frames from being in contact with the ground. Now, I know that eventually the termites would bore through that, but that might be an idea. I haven't ever really had a lot of people complain, though, about termites, and I think that's because they become a little bit more on the dormant side, especially outside in the winter. And so I don't know that it's a huge worry. If it is a big problem in your area, then maybe you don't use wood. Maybe you buy those commercially, those plastic ones that use that corrugated polycarbonate plastic instead, and then you wouldn't have to worry about it. Okay. All right, and then L40 Wildflowers is saying, whoops, my computer just died. What happened? Here we go. In Zone 4, can we build to incorporate all three hoop house that fits over a cold frame? Yes, you could. There's actually, if you look at Elliot Coleman, who is kind of the grandfather of year-round gardening, he's the one that originally wrote the books about this. He actually has a method with his commercial, because he grows commercially in the wintertime, and he puts cold frames inside of high hoops. So he has high hoops that are about 8 or 10 feet wide, and he'll put the high hoop on, and then he puts a cold frame inside. And so yes, that could be a great idea in Zone 4. That would definitely help to extend your growing season. You could have all three: a hoop house over a cold frame with fabric row cover underneath it. That would be a great idea. A lot of work, but definitely something that you could do in Zone 4. So great thinking. And that book of Elliot Coleman's is called shoot, I'm sorry. Just go to your library's website and look up Elliot Coleman. It's not the Winter Gardener's book. It's another one, and it's more designed for commercial growers. So he's standing on the cover. He's standing inside a giant hoop house. And I apologize, I don't remember the name of that book off the top of my head. But if you want to email me, I can look it up for you. So email me at rick@ourstoneyacres.com, and I can look it up for you. That's I can't remember the name of the book, but that's definitely an option that you could do. Okay, I think now it's not 4-season harvest. So I've had a couple of people who are posting 4-season harvest, and that's not the one where he really talks about that. He talks a lot more about it in his other book. That's the one I can't remember. Winter Harvest Handbook. That's it. Yep, that's it. I think that's the one. So yes. Okay, let me see. I got a couple more questions here, and I think we'll wrap it up. No, it looks like we handled those. So, okay. All right, guys, thank you for being here. I appreciate it. And make sure that you get signed up for the master course. So we really go into a lot of detail in the year-round gardening master course. The special ends, the special price, which is $69 for you guys, plus the bonus course. That ends on Saturday, July 15th. That's the last day that we're actually going to be selling this course for this year. So make sure that you take advantage of that. There is a link in the description of this video with arrows pointing to it and everything so that you guys can see that. That's the link that you'll click that will give you that $69 price. So again, we're super excited to get started next week with the Year-Round Gardening Master Course. It's a lot of fun. You guys are going to enjoy it. We already have a really good crowd of people already coming in, and normally it's the last 2 or 3 days where we get the most people coming. So I'm feeling confident that we're going to have well over 100 people again this year in the program, and so it's going to be a lot of fun. So come and join us, and I'll teach you everything you need to know. We go into a ton more detail than what we've done in these workshops and really dig in and cover all of this stuff on year-round gardening. So I would love to teach you and help you guys to get better at growing year-round, okay? All right, thank you for participating in all of these workshops. We had a good crowd all along, and I appreciate you guys being here. Go get that course, link down in the description, and we'll talk to you guys later. Happy gardening. Thanks for your support, guys.